So yes, I am Mark. I'm the project architect on the Picture House project. And as Wendy says, I'm going to give a bit of a kind of behind the scenes look into the construction work so far. But also before that, I'm going to give a bit of a kind of background as to basically all the steps we've been taking over the past few years on the project and how we've got to where we are now. It's really, really exciting to be here. Excuse me. Really nice to see people in person and not do this over Zoom or Teams, which is pretty refreshing over the past year that we've had. So yeah, really nice venue to have this in. It's pretty special for us as well. So really, really glad to be here. So thanks for coming. As Wendy said, we PH Park Architects, we've been working on the project for a number of years. We're very embedded in the project, and I think we first got involved with Hyde Park in 2017. So we've been working on this for a good number of years, and these projects do take years and years to get off the ground, but it's been a huge effort from everybody involved. I think the delays that we've had because of COVID have kind of been difficult for everybody, but it's all the more reason that we're so excited to actually be able to start talking about the project and start sharing the progress that we've got on site so far. So just very briefly, I'm going to give a very quick background as to who we are and why we're working on a project like this. We are based up in Glasgow, but we have a Leeds office down here as well, and we work on these kind of projects day in, day out. So we work across all sectors across the UK, projects of various scales, but we focus on heritage, kind of listed historic buildings like the Picture House, and from major theatre redevelopment projects, big extensions, big kind of client bodies, right down to the kind of smaller community arts organisations as well. One of the projects we've just recently completed down here in Leeds, hopefully recognisable to a lot of people here, is the Leeds Playhouse, and fantastic project. If you haven't been yet, I would definitely recommend taking a trip there. So to say, we've been involved with the Picture House for a number of years, but of course it's not just us working on this redevelopment project. We're working with a really great team of engineers and cost consultants and project managers, as well as the main contractor as well. So there's a really wide team of experts and specialists who are all inputting into this project. Just to kind of briefly give a bit of background about the building from our point of view, I think it's kind of important just to talk about the building itself, and it almost goes without saying that this building is, it has such a rich history, and I assume most of the people here have visited the Picture at some stage. It's just got this incredibly rich history, opening in the outbreak of World War I. And it's been through a lot, as Wendy was saying, when a lot of these kind of venues were facing closure and challenges. It's kind of been supported by this really protective, loving community of cinema goers, which is really, really interesting to see. So it's kind of known for being the local cozy Picture House that is kind of like going around to your friends to watch a film, which is really, really nice, and it's one of the reasons we love working on this project. And it's kind of whatever you want to call it. It's the quirky cinema or the quaint, cozy cinema. It's just really kind of, it sets it apart from other venues like this. But it's also of national significance, as most people are aware. It is the last gaslit cinema in the UK, and potentially one of the very few remaining gaslit cinemas around the world. So it's of national kind of architectural and historical significance for that reason. Which kind of begs the question, why do anything to the building? Why do we need to intervene? Why is this redevelopment project happening? Well, unfortunately, with historic buildings of this age, they can't really be left to their own devices. They start to show a bit of signs of wear. They start to get a bit tired over the years, and no matter how well looked after the building is, or no matter how much maintenance you do to it, parts of the built fabric are going to fail over the years. So when the films are finished and the house lights come back on, it does become quite apparent that there's plaster flaking, the timber gutters around the roof starting to rot, leaky windows, cracks, cast iron work, all the rainwater goods kind of starting to corrode. So we had to kind of intervene with that respect to kind of secure this building's future. above and beyond that, there's kind of the question of comfort and the user's experience of the building. Although people love going there, it's kind of thinking about the comfort of not just visitors, but the staff and volunteers that are in this building every day. And it obviously gets, freezing in the winter, roasting in the summer. Things like the uninsulated roof, the single glazed windows, and the kind of outdated services, the electrics, the plumbing and ventilation, kind of needs to be dealt with just to bring it back into the kind of modern day. But fundamentally, what trumps all of this is the issue of access to the building. Hyde Park is not unique in this respect, but historic buildings just weren't designed to be accessible. It's kind of easy to see off the bat that the picture house has a stepped main entrance, which just isn't really acceptable in modern society. Having people have to use different entrances just to get in if they have mobility issues or a wheelchair user. So fundamentally, inclusivity and access is absolutely critical to the project, and that's kind of what a lot of the redevelopment focuses around. But not just access into the building. Once you're actually inside, things that a lot of people would take for granted, like going to the toilet. To go to the toilet in the picture house, you have to either go down a flight of stairs or up a flight of stairs, so it's obviously not ideal in that regard. But generally, it is a cozy building, but that means it's small. The foyer space itself is cozy. It's quite tight for space. So if you imagine quite a few people milling around in the foyer and you have access requirements, or if you're in a wheelchair, it's not an inclusive environment if you are struggling to maneuver around the building. So fundamentally, this is one of the reasons we absolutely have to intervene with the project. So to quickly run through the kind of proposals that we're working on in terms of a design and how we are addressing some of these issues in terms of the failing fabric of the building, but also the access requirements and other challenges from the picture house as an organization. I'm going to run through just a few images here that kind of outline the proposals as they stand at the minute. So obviously there's work to the existing building that I've talked about. We need to kind of look at the brick and the stone and the slate roof and the lead work, all of that kind of stuff. But obviously we're proposing, we're building this extension onto the side of the building on the Brudenell Road side, which is a 2-story extension above ground, and then there's a basement level as well. But what you can see here is it's not just the extension we're building, but there's also some key landscaping at the front of the main entrance here to deal with the stepped access. So fundamentally, ramping the access to the front door of the building means we get level access for everybody to get into the building through the same front doors, democratic access. So the extension itself kind of takes some cues from the existing building in terms of material and proportions, trying not to distract from the kind of significance of the original building is the last thing we want to do, but trying to make this appropriate piece of design to be sticking on the side of the building. To take the lid off then and look at the building on the ground floor, you can see here that the ramped access leads through a new glazed-in draft lobby. So what you can see here is that the ramped access will lead through the front door. These are all automatic opening doors, and you'll come into an enlarged foyer space. So the way we're doing that is basically taking the rear wall of the auditorium and pushing it into the auditorium, sacrificing a couple of rows of seats for the benefits of increased space at the main entrance. So that gives us a bigger kiosk space for the staff and volunteers to work out of, but also allows us to fit in a new accessible WC in the foyer, right adjacent to the main auditorium, which is obviously what was severely lacking in the original building. We've also added in a new acoustic lobby before we get into the auditorium, and obviously the new ground floor of the extension, which is adding kind of additional spill out space into the foyer, more space for people to spend time in the building without kind of getting in the way, essentially. And we see the photos Wendy was showing of people queuing outside, in the cold and the rain and the winter. It offers a bit more space for people to actually spend time in the building. Beyond that, which is critically important to the extension as well, you can see just beside the seating area that we have a new platform lift going in the extension, which is going to give access to the basement level and also the first floor of the extension. The main auditorium itself, we are not fundamentally changing beyond the rear wall moving in. It's getting a refresh, it's getting new carpets and new cinema seating. But the key kind of architectural moves are at the rear of the auditorium to fit in the new services there. The one thing you can see there's a yellow line at the front of the auditorium, and that's a new acoustic lining to the front wall, which is a shared wall with the neighboring property. So that's to increase the kind of performance of the space acoustically, and that's going to be hidden behind the proscenium surrounding the cinema screen. So what's quite nice to show in this diagram is that something we're quite proud to kind of demonstrate is that people can arrive at the building and go from the street right to their seat in the auditorium without having to touch a door, without any physical barriers, because all of the doors from the main entrance doors through the acoustic lobby and into the cinema are all automatic opening. So it's really about just opening up the building and let people get to their seats without any of these physical barriers. Jumping up to the first floor of the extension here, you can see there's a new public space at the corner of the extension, which is kind of a flexible community space where they can hold other events and kind of just as a flexible space for different things, but also kind of additional toilets and storage space here as well, with some nice kind of feature windows looking out onto Brudenell Road. Jumping down into the basement then, one of the critical parts of the new redevelopment project is excavating the basement to form a new second screening room, which is part of kind of increasing the flexibility for the picture house to have two screenings on at the same time. So this is a really specialist kind of acoustically isolated box within a box, which allows kind of two screenings to be happening at the same time with the auditorium directly above. And what you can see here then in the extension in the basement is that this platform lift will take you down into this new foyer space for kind of a small waiting area with some additional toilets and seating, and then you can come straight through into the new screening room with dedicated wheelchair spaces right in the center of the room. And that's kind of an artist's depiction there of what we're looking at, just showing the kind of proportions of the new extension. So I suppose it's important then, before I kind of start showing some of the behind the scenes on site and the construction progress, is to talk about how do we achieve all of these changes, significant changes to this historic building without spoiling the charm, without spoiling this character that everybody loves. Us, as an organization working with the Picture House for various years, we're also very protective of it. But the approach we need to take is an approach of care and understanding that we don't want to sterilize this charm whatsoever. We don't want to just come in and impose designs and change the very kind of nature of the building. And it's about an approach of addressing these really significant, familiar, recognizable aspects of the building, these kind of quirky charms and leftovers from kind of a previous era, like the fire hydrant in the foyer and the gas lamps, obviously, but all the little bits that really make the Picture House what it is. But in terms of an approach, at the very start of our involvement, it was obviously, as with projects of this nature, it was really important to understand the building as it was before we do anything to it. So a big part of that was a lot of research, architectural research into old historic drawings, the original drawings for the building, historic photos, sketches, postcards, anecdotal stories from people who knew the building historically, just trying to understand where the building came from. Further to that, then there was a process of recording the building as a point in time. Before we touch the building, before we do anything to it, we had to understand what is the Picture House like today or 4 months ago, before we started. And there was a few sequences to this. There was kind of initially an archaeological recording, kind of photographic recording undertaken, where archaeologists came in and photographed every inch of the building as a point in time. As well as us, obviously, the design team and the client team taking tens of thousands of photographs of the building. I think if it wasn't already the most photographed building in Leeds, it certainly is now. And then getting a wee bit more high tech, we got some specialists in to do a point cloud scan, which is basically a kind of 3D scan of the building as it stands. And they bring in these fancy machines on tripods that fire lasers everywhere. And it gives you a really detailed virtual model of the building to kind of millimeter accuracy, which is not only really important for having this as an asset, a record of the building as a point in time, but that's then the basis of what we used as a design team to build a 3D model and a coordinated approach to kind of using it as a design tool and inputting the new design information into. So then once we could actually start, getting to grips with the building and understanding how it was constructed historically, we needed to piece together information on build-ups of walls and floors, and And as is the nature of these projects, some of this had to be intrusive, like the faience at the main entrance. It has quite a lot of signs of cracking, which kind of indicates movement somehow, structural movement underneath, which was a bit of a concern originally because we were worried that the steelwork underneath had corroded to a point where we were going to have to replace a lot of this. But thankfully, we got local specialists in to take out one of these blocks and look at the steelwork, and thankfully, it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be. Some of these blocks underneath the Hyde Park sign are going to need to get replaced, but we're working with the specialists, local specialists who are kind of producing these samples to get as close a color match to this historic faience as we can, so we can stitch this in without being obvious. Beyond that, there was a number of other surveys, including the boring stuff like asbestos surveys and timber rot surveys to understand the building. But one of the interesting aspects of it was, as Wendy kind of started to talk about, was the cast iron lamppost. So we got specialists in who did a really thorough kind of 50-page document outlining exactly all the little bits that need to be repaired, redecorated of the lamppost, which gives us a really clear idea of how to kind of address this really iconic piece of the picture house. Because again, it's one of these aspects of the building that probably looks fine from street level. It probably looks like it's okay, but whenever you get up close and look at it, it is really kind of in need of intervention. And then just before I get on to progress, one of the last surveys we had done, which is always enjoyable to share if people haven't already seen some of these images, we had a paint sampling survey done of the building, basically where specialists come in and I think they took about 40 to 50 paint scrapings around the building, all around the key spaces in the foyer, in the auditorium, the lamppost, the kind of external windows, everything like that. They take these paint scrapings and then they basically take a cross-section of that and look at it under a microscope. And what it gives you is these really amazing cross-sectional images of flakes of paint. So it actually shows you, since the building was originally constructed, depending on where you take the sample from, you can see the layers of paint that have been added to the building over the decades, and it kind of we can indicate roughly when that happened. So it was really fascinating for us to see, that this foyer that we've always known as kind of maroon and off-white was actually at one stage, this kind of turquoisey blue and orange and baby blue. Really, really quite fascinating to see. Similarly, with the auditorium, we can see the various color schemes that's been through. So they're kind of a piece of art in their own right. I kind of really like these images, and it's always quite interesting to share with people. So basically, all these surveys that we did, all this kind of research and consultation with the client and with the public and heritage bodies and the planners, it's given us a really robust set of design information, both architecturally and with all the engineers and all the specialists, acousticians and everything. It's given us this set of information that we can then hand over to a contractor and say, exactly every little piece of work that needs to happen to this building, every window that needs repaired, every bit of brick and slate and lead work that needs to be replaced, every single little miscellaneous feature of the building that doesn't really fall into any category, but it needs to be addressed, making sure nothing is thrown out or damaged, making sure it's all protected or taken off-site during the works to then be brought back. Was a really, really critical part. And as I say, we have this really kind of intelligent 3D model then that all of the consultants are inputting into, including the engineers. So they've got all the new kind of steelwork and concrete piles coming into the building. And it's a way of us all coordinating everything to make sure everything is kind of millimeter perfect and where it needs to be in the construction. And this is pretty amazing. The services engineers have basically modeled every radiator and light switch and vent and duct and everything that is going to go into the building, everything that's getting replaced from an engineering point of view has been modeled in this 3D model. So it's a really useful asset as a design team. So onto the progress so far then. I think a lot of this has been shared on social media, but not everybody will have seen some of these. I think there's a few behind the scenes photos that people won't be aware of. So I think, as Wendy said, this project's been a long time coming, not just over the past 5 or 6 years from our point of view, but from the picture house's point of view. This has been, a long time coming even before that. And, COVID kind of held things up a lot, but even just seeing stuff start to get stripped out of the building was really, really exciting for us. And even, in the first few weeks of the project, just seeing the seats getting removed was really exciting because we knew it was happening. We knew the ball was rolling and there was no turning back. So the first steps of kind of removing all the stuff out of the building uncovered quite a lot of nice little discoveries that we didn't really anticipate. So there's nice things which I think are at the back of the room, nice little reserved seating signs that were found underneath the decking up in the balcony level, underneath the seats, and little newspaper clippings that were in the basement. But the really interesting one was these old posters that were kind of plastered directly onto the brick wall on Brudenell Road. They took off the old timber and glass poster boxes, and these were just kind of buried underneath that. So it was really, really quite nice to see that. And luckily, this one on the top left, that's actually in a section of the brick wall that the extension is being built up against, but that bit of brick is being exposed. So we'll have this kind of on display, which is quite nice in the extension. And as we've kind of talked about, the lamppost went. That was one of the very first things that happened, and it was quite a dramatic day on site because we all kind of arrived just as it was getting lifted out of the ground, and I think it was a bit of a heart and mouth moment seeing this kind of iconic piece of picture house just dangling over the street, and it turned a few heads that day of people walking past. So if anybody has wondered where it's gone, it's been taken away to some specialists in Shrewsbury who are basically going to take really good care of it, strip it back, make all the cast iron repairs where necessary, and it's going to get kind of new wiring inside, and it's still going to be a functional light and reinstated exactly where it was. So I'm going to run through the kind of 3 or 4 key spaces of the building and progress to date in those. So initially, just to talk about the foyer briefly, there's not a huge amount that's been done in the foyer so far, but enough that it has become a very different looking space. This is kind of, as everybody will recognize it, the red carpet and the kind of cozy little kiosk tucked under the mantelpiece. From early doors in the project, we did suspect that there was some of this nice mosaic terrazzo, which is on the kind of main entrance floor externally to the building. There was kind of a hint that some of this would be underneath the red carpet in the foyer, and excitingly, once the carpet got lifted, we did start to see the terrazzo appearing, and unfortunately, it's underneath this kind of layer of vinyl tiles that have been industrially glued to the terrazzo, so it's going to be quite a job to get all of that off, but it'll all be stripped, and then the terrazzo is basically going to get ground and polished by a local specialist, which will bring all the color out of it and give it a nice finish, and it will be probably the first time this terrazzo has been visible in close to 100 years, I imagine, so that'll be really, really exciting. And similarly, the timber stair you can see there, which was fully carpeted, there's evidence that this actually had a kind of central carpet runner going up the middle of it, potentially with the nice stair rods as well. So we're looking at possibly reinstating that as well and giving that a nice kind of highlighting the importance of this feature stair. Moving into the auditorium then, that's been quite a dramatic change over the past few months. Again, this is kind of the last time anybody would have seen it. This is kind of what it looked like, the very familiar, recognizable auditorium. As I say, the first few steps were just getting all the stuff out of there, everything that wasn't screwed down, and a lot of stuff that was screwed down, just getting it out of the room, lifting the cinema seats and the carpets and stripping everything out. But one of the key bits of works that happened in there first was part of the asbestos removal. So the asbestos survey early doors highlighted that the proscenium arch around the cinema screen, this kind of striped wall that surrounds the screen, had some panels that contained asbestos, so that had to come down anyway. And in order to do the new acoustic lining to the front wall, this all had to come down anyway. But once that did come down, what we did anticipate, we knew there was the ornate plasterwork behind this proscenium, this really nice kind of festoons and cherub faces and everything in decorative plasterwork. We were aware that was there, but it was really hard to get a good look at it. Because obviously with the curtains and the cinema screen. So getting the cinema screen down for a start was quite exciting to start to get glimpses in there. But then whenever the proscenium itself came down, it unveiled a big surprise for us, which we didn't anticipate. But there was an even earlier proscenium that the latest proscenium had been built on top of, which, there was no evidence of this from poking your head around the back. It was a complete surprise to everyone involved. So it was really, really exciting to see this, because it's obviously from a different era. Looking at the kind of designs, it obviously has these kind of Art Deco motifs to it. It's got these geometric lines, but it's quite interesting to see this in direct comparison with the original plasterwork on the front wall, and the kind of some of the parallels that are there in terms of design. We suspect this was probably introduced around 1930s, is probably the best guess at the minute, but you can see it's not in great condition. It has already been kind of sliced at one side, so it's a bit asymmetric at the minute, and it's obviously been damaged around the base. So it wasn't terribly well constructed, but really, really fascinating to see that. So we took a lot of interest in the first instance, just because it was so surprising, and we again got the archaeologists out, took hundreds of photos of this, kind of assessed it, and structurally it wasn't great. It's kind of this rickety, poorly constructed proscenium, which made us think it was maybe a bit of a kind of cheap and cheerful addition to the picture house back in the day, possibly to conceal the introduction of new speakers and audio equipment, because you can see it's quite awkwardly kind of spanning directly in the middle of the fire exits, and it's in a bit of an awkward position. But yeah, interesting to say the least. So you can see here, there's a few diagrams that just kind of, it's interesting to look at how the various layers of these prosceniums relate to each other. So this is the proscenium that everybody's kind of familiar with, which we suspect, again, was introduced roughly in the 60s, and then kind of compared to this potentially 1930s fragments of the proscenium, and then the original front wall of the projection wall. It's just quite interesting because, again, this has been covered for decades and decades, and nobody's really ever had a chance to see it in the full. But looking at how these layers have just kind of been added over the years is really quite interesting. Especially, it's rare to see this in direct comparison in real life. You can see the various color schemes just in direct comparison. These are just some of the site photos that we take on a daily basis, but there's something kind of poetic about just seeing these moments in time that have just been, frozen and added to. But what it does also highlight is kind of how ruthless they were back in the day with the decorative, with the ornate plasterwork. But I suppose if this was introduced in the 30s, the building was only about 15 years old, so they probably didn't think too much of slicing through this and building a new proscenium. But it is quite heartbreaking to see the original plasterwork in a condition like that. So that's just showing the latest proscenium, the 60s proscenium, the one that everybody's familiar with, is going to get reinstated in a like-for-like manner. So it'll be visually exactly the same as everybody remembers it. And as I say, the acoustic partition behind that will be it'll be hidden, and that's going to basically cover the ornate plasterwork and protect it for the foreseeable future. There's ambitions of, can we unveil this ornate plasterwork, but it's all down to acoustics and ownerships of property and things like that. So it's there as a future ambition, but for the time being, we're going to encapsulate this. It's a freestanding acoustic partition, so nothing's getting fixed into that wall. It's being protected as it stands. Jumping down into the basement then is probably one of the spaces that members of the public won't actually be familiar with, because it's not really a space that was open to anybody beyond the staff and volunteers. So this is kind of roughly what it looked like before the works. As you would expect, it's kind of a dark, bit of a dingy space underneath the main auditorium. It was mainly used for storage of boxes of stock and posters and things like that, which kind of begs the question: how on earth were we going to fit in a new 50-seat screening room in the basement in amongst all of this? So the first part of making that happen was basically removing anything that wasn't load-bearing. So it was stripping out all of the stuff that was in there and removing all the walls that weren't holding up the auditorium slab above. So that kind of, taking out all the rubbish that was down there. It also highlighted these windows, kind of below ground light wells that were in the Brudenell Road elevation. And it's kind of a good time to then bring up the fact that this basement, not everybody's aware of this, but it's believed that the basement of the picture house was actually built for another building, which was never then kind of built above ground. And then the picture house was built on top of this basement that was never really designed for it, which is why it's kind of slightly at odds with the architecture above ground. You've got these really industrial steel beams, riveted beams, and big chunky brick piers here on the side. And again, these street level light wells going up to Brudenell Road, which is all kind of, it's a bit different from the architecture above ground. And actually, one of the discoveries just on site this morning that we weren't aware of, and I don't even think Wendy is aware of, but we've removed an old water tank that was in the basement and found a coal chute coming up from Pearson Grove. So it's these little things that nobody had any idea of, but are really interesting to see, and it just tells another layer of that story of the building. So really, really fascinating. So this is roughly what the basement looks like now, having removed all the non-load bearing internal walls and taken all the kind of rubbish out of there. And you can start to see now where this second screening room is actually going to be placed in the building. So we have a bit of excavation to do in the next phase of works, because we're only at kind of just over 2.5 meters head height as it stands. But obviously this is going to go down another kind of 2 meters to fit in that screening room. And then just to kind of finish up, I wanted to briefly talk about the progress of the extension externally, because this is one of the elements that anybody walking past the picture house, you've obviously been able to see into the site. And for a long time, it was just kind of a hole in the ground or a pile of mud, but there's been some really good progress over the past couple of months. One of the most exciting days on site was whenever the piling rig arrived on site. So this was basically coming along and boring big, I think 6 meter deep bores into the ground and filling with concrete, and these kind of big steel reinforcement cages. And it basically forms a retaining wall structure for the basement and kind of sets a really good foundation for building all the new structure on top of that. So what that started to look like then, once they had kind of worked all the reinforcement and structural requirements of it, it starts to look like this, which is really exciting to see because you start to get a sense of the scale of the basement. This is only kind of halfway excavated, so there's another, I think, 2 meters of excavation to go here. But it gets you a sense of the extension, the footprint of it, which is really exciting to see. And what you can see here as well are some remnants of the original basement that was built, and you can see that it is kind of slightly at odds with the building above ground. And these are the kind of light wells that you could see going into the basement. And then, over the next kind of period, it'll be a case of we'll start to see the steel frame kind of growing out of the ground from this really good foundation that we've built. And early next year, we'll start to get more hands-on with the specialist kind of conservation works to the existing building, the kind of slate works and all the brick and all the kind of really special internal elements of the auditorium. That'll start to get looked at next year, and if we're on track, this should be due to finish kind of late summer next year. I think July, August is the target at the minute. So exciting to see that over the next few months. And if you're following the Picture House and Page Park on social media, we're trying to keep everybody up to date as much as we can over the process. So if anybody has any questions, happy to kind of answer them towards the end, or you can get in touch with kind of social media or email. So thanks for your time. I'm sorry I didn't have any photos of cats, but that's kind of the best I could do for now. So thanks for your time.